Sweden was once the global blueprint for peace, harmony, and the golden age of the middle class. But that model is currently being dismantled by the sound of 30 explosions a month. Imagine a country where 15-year-old girls, blonde, green girls from traditional backgrounds, are being groomed not just for romance, but to carry out contract killings and transport hand grenades on the morning commute. In 2022, Stockholm's gun deaths were 30 times higher than London's. This isn't just a crime wave, it is a total fragmentation of a society. The question every European citizen is now asking is, how did the model of peace become the bomb capital of the continent?
The most chilling development in the Swedish crisis is the evolution of the recruitment pool. Gangs like Foxtrot, led by international fugitives, have pivoted away from recruiting from their own neighborhoods. Instead, they are targeting green girls, native Swedish teenagers who the police are less likely to profile. These girls are being offered upwards of £13,000 to act as couriers and assassins. They are the unseen soldiers in a war between rival factions like the Kurdish Fox and the Strawberry. This isn't just a local dispute. Intelligence suggests these gangs are now operating as proxies for foreign regimes, targeting embassies and schools. The infiltration has reached the courts themselves, with gang-affiliated individuals reportedly securing jobs within the justice system to sabotage it from the inside.
For decades, the Swedish elite operated on a policy of social welfare as a shield. The belief was that if you gave everyone a hug, a welfare check, and a seat at the table, crime would vanish. Critics call it the lemonade and biscuits approach, a soft-on-crime ideology that treated ice-cold killers as victims of their circumstances. But with 60,000 people now directly linked to organized crime in a country of only 10 million, the math no longer adds up. The generous welfare state, which was meant to integrate, has instead been infiltrated, with millions in state funds reportedly being siphoned off to fuel a 17 billion criminal economy.
Sweden is currently undergoing a traumatic sobering up. The new Conservative government is attempting to militarize the police response and lower the age of criminal responsibility to 13, but they are fighting 40 years of entrenched liberal polity. While the political left still argues for hugs over handcuffs, the reality on the ground is drone surveillance over Stockholm and police officers being gunned down in routine checks. This is the suicide cult of multiculturalism gone wrong, where the state's desire to appear virtuous has left its own children vulnerable to predatory gangs.
The Swedish experiment is at a crossroads. For 30 years, anyone who sounded the alarm was silenced as a dissident or a xenophobe. Today, the facts are doing the talking. As the ice age of crime settles over Scandinavia, the rest of the world is watching closely, because what is happening in the streets of Stockholm today is a warning for every liberal democracy. A society that cannot protect its own borders or its own children will eventually lose its soul. The model of peace is gone. The era of the draconian measure has begun.
Current headline on Sky News.
They arrived before dawn, long before London had even rubbed the sleep from its eyes. In the freezing rain, wrapped in heavy coats and determination, thousands of farmers moved steadily toward Whitehall. Within minutes, the polished calm of government territory cracked. The street where Britain's biggest decisions are signed and stamped suddenly belonged to the countryside. Tractors lined the avenues, boots stomped through the puddles. Placards rose into the winter light like warning signs from a nation pushed too far. And here is the unsettling truth. For the first time since taking power, Sir Keir Starmer's government looked genuinely shaken. What unfolded today was not a symbolic demonstration. It was a revolt, disciplined, furious, and unmistakably personal. The spark was simple, inheritance tax, but the fire it lit exposed something far deeper. Whitehall echoed with chants so loud the windows shuddered. "We will not be taxed into extinction," the crowd shouted, and the force of it carried down the entire government quarter. Some had traveled through the night, many had never protested before. Yet here they were, families who had worked the same land for a century, young farmers who no longer knew if they'd ever inherit it, and communities bound together by the quiet understanding that this moment, right here, could decide their future. London has seen anger before, but this was different. This was rural Britain at the breaking point.
The government says only a small number of farms will be affected by its inheritance tax changes, perhaps around 500 a year once all allowances are added in. But farmers insist the reality is far more dire. They argue the Treasury's figures are misleading, that thousands of farms could eventually be dragged into tax liabilities they simply cannot afford. And today, standing shoulder to shoulder in the Capitol, they made their message unmistakably clear. They do not trust the government's numbers, they do not trust its promises, and they certainly do not trust a last-minute U-turn dropped quietly before Christmas Eve. That U-turn, meant to ease tensions, has instead become a symbol of something worse. In rural communities, it reads not as correction, but as confession, a sign the government realized its mistake only after inflicting damage. Farmers describe weeks of fear, confusion, and sleepless nights as they tried to calculate how much of their land, their homes, their livelihoods might have to be sold just to satisfy the new tax rules. Some even reported emotional breakdowns. One elderly couple asked in a letter read aloud to Parliament, "By when should we die to avoid bankrupting our children?" It was the kind of question that should stop a government in its tracks. But instead of addressing the matter head-on, ministers released their revision the day before Christmas Eve, as though hoping it would simply dissolve into the holiday haze. It did not. It detonated. And today's march was the shockwave.
To understand why this is turning into a national rupture, you must look at the broader climate. Britain right now is stretched thin. Public frustration is simmering across multiple fronts. Immigration remains a politically explosive topic, with 2/3 of voters believing numbers are rising, even as official data shows they have fallen. Reform UK is surging in the polls, capitalizing on every misstep the government makes. Public institutions are under strain. Police are managing protests not just in London, but in coastal towns where anti-immigration tensions flare weekly. Teachers, doctors, and transport workers are watching today's events very carefully because if farmers can force a retreat, others may try the same. And then there is the deeper fracture, the widening gulf between urban and rural Britain. Policies that feel like minor adjustments in Westminster can feel like existential threats in Herefordshire, Cumbria, or Powys. A city may look at a £1 million asset threshold and see wealth. A farmer looks at it and sees a working business, land that cannot simply be sold off without destroying an entire way of life. It is not an investment portfolio, it is a generational trust. That is why today's protest is so dangerous for the government. It shows not just disagreement, but outright alienation. Farmers believe they were misled, they believe they were targeted, and they believe labor does not understand and does not value the culture of family farming. In short, a political bond has broken.
This matters beyond sentiment. Britain's food security depends on these communities. If farms begin collapsing under tax burdens or selling land to private investors, the consequences are stark. Rising food prices, increasing imports, destabilized supply chains, and the erosion of rural employment. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They are the exact outcomes many farmers warned about as they stood at the gates of Parliament today. And the government knows it. Behind closed doors tonight, senior ministers will be asking the same question haunting Downing Street since sunrise. How much more backlash can Labour absorb before something gives? Starmer is facing a moment of political peril. A second U-turn would signal weakness. No U-turn may guarantee months of escalating unrest. Either path carries risk. His advisors know this protest will not be the last. Farmers have already said they will return, with even larger numbers, until the tax is completely withdrawn. What began as a dispute over inheritance rules has become a national test of confidence, and confidence is precisely what Labour cannot afford to lose. Meanwhile, other groups are watching. If the countryside can force Westminster onto its knees, then the NHS unions, the rail unions, the anti-immigration groups, and the restless public sector may feel emboldened. Britain's protest culture, already revitalized by the crises of the past 2 years, may be standing on the edge of a new phase, one where every grievance becomes a march on the capital.
As evening settles over Whitehall, the streets fall quiet, but the tension does not. The tractors are gone, The crowds dispersed, but the memory of the day hangs in the air like smoke. A government that promised stability has found itself staring at its most volatile moment yet. The rural uprising has begun, and if the farmers return stronger, as they have vowed, Britain may be heading toward a confrontation unlike anything in recent memory. The only question now is chilling in its simplicity. If today was the warning shot, what will the next eruption look like?
The gates of Cameron Barracks opened before dawn, and with them a wave of anxiety swept through the Highlands. Coaches carrying hundreds of migrant men, most of them young, alone, and recently arrived through the overstretched asylum system, rolled into a military installation that was never designed for a crisis of this scale. Inside the neighbouring homes, British Army families pulled their curtains back and watched in silence. Their husbands, fathers and partners are set for overseas deployment early this year, leaving behind women and children living just metres from an encampment of nearly 300 unfamiliar men. But the latest figures reveal an even more alarming reality. Inverness is just one node in a nationwide expansion.
803 migrants crossed the English Channel yesterday. That's the highest single-day crossing since October.
Across the UK, military sites from East Sussex to the Northern Highlands are now being prepared for up to 800 asylum-seeking men, a scale far beyond what local families were told when the first coaches arrived. What seemed like an isolated emergency is in truth part of a much larger operation unfolding quietly across Britain. And now, Britain is asking the same question. How did we get here?
For weeks, whispers had circulated in Inverness. Families spoke of phone calls from counsellors, hastily arranged meetings, warnings that a temporary accommodation solution might be placed on their doorstep. But few expected the scale, few expected the speed, and fewer still expected a government that repeatedly promised to restore border control, to move hundreds of asylum-seeking men into an active military zone, without the full backing of the community that must live with the consequences. Walking along the boundary fence today, the mood was unmistakable, tense, apprehensive, and edged with a sense of betrayal. These are not residents opposed to compassion. They are families who have endured years of deployments, sacrifices and separations, people who, perhaps more than most, understand what it means to serve their country, yet they now face daily life in the shadow of a policy that has brought the national migration crisis to their doorstep. And the timing could not be more politically explosive.
Across the UK, frustration over immigration has surged. The year 2025 closed with a deeply unsettling figure, over 41,000 small boat arrivals, the second highest total on record, despite repeated government promises to stop the boats. While Prime Minister Keir Starmer entered office vowing to restore order, his administration has struggled to contain a system collapsing under sheer volume. The Home Office, now led by Shabana Mahmood, is attempting a hard pivot. Temporary asylum status, longer pathways to residency, stricter assessments, and new return agreements with countries such as Angola and Namibia. But these measures, critics argue, are months, if not years, away from showing results. And in the meantime, the country must house more than 100,000 asylum seekers. What about our safety? One mother asked today, gripping her child's school bag. Why here? Why next to families whose partners are deployed? Why choose us? It is a question travelling far beyond Scotland. Communities across England and Wales have seen hotels converted, hostels repurposed, and council buildings transformed, often with minimal warning.
Every time a new site opens, the same arguments erupt. Concerns over policing, concerns over crime, concerns over cultural tensions, especially after high-profile cases involving asylum seekers sparked national outrage last year. Concerns that the UK's asylum system is no longer merely overwhelmed, but fundamentally broken. Inside the barracks, security patrols have been stepped up. Officials insist the men have undergone safety checks, but residents point to Home Office data showing tens of thousands of undocumented individuals remain untracked, and that more than 40,000 subjects of national security interest sit on intelligence watch lists. The fear, they say, is not rooted in prejudice, but in the government's repeated failure to demonstrate control. The political stakes are immense. Polling shows immigration is now the #1 issue for British voters, eclipsing the economy, NHS waiting lists and housing. Reform UK has capitalised on this sentiment, drawing support away from both Labour and the Conservatives. Within Labour, senior strategists warn the government faces an erosion of trust unless it can show concrete progress, not slogans, not promises, but visible, measurable action.
What happened in Inverness is now part of a wider pattern. A country improvising, relocating, redistributing and relocating again, because no single part of the system is working properly. Local councils say they're overwhelmed, charities are stretched thin, the Home Office is drowning in backlogs, and residents feel they were never asked, only instructed. But the issue goes deeper still. For years, Britain has debated the cultural and security implications of large-scale migration. Some commentators argue that concerns are being weaponized for political gain. Others point to grooming gang scandals that authorities once avoided discussing and claim that officials are still too reluctant to confront hard questions about integration, cultural clashes and safeguarding. In today's debate, these tensions exploded once more. One side warned against painting all migrants as dangerous. Another insisted that acknowledging crime trends is not racism but realism. The divide is no longer left versus right. It is between those who believe Britain must treat individuals as individuals and those who believe cultural risk cannot be ignored. Both arguments now collide in the quiet streets surrounding Cameron Barracks.
Inside Parliament, the Home Office issued a statement claiming asylum hotels will be closed and that new, more suitable sites are being developed to ease pressure on communities. But families at the barracks say this reassures no one. They have heard similar promises for years, first from Conservatives, now from Labour. The government has managed to restore the confidence of the public, a public increasingly convinced that Britain's borders are no longer controlled by those elected to run them. Tonight, Inverness becomes a symbol, not of compassion or hostility, but of a country caught between its values and its fears, its obligations and its limits. Britain is torn between humanitarian identity and a rising demand for order. It is a nation struggling to reconcile who it wants to be with what it feels it has become. The buses may have arrived quietly, but the consequences will not unfold quietly. The families watching from their windows know that. The government knows that. And Britain, fractured, uncertain, restless, knows that too. So the question now hangs heavy over the Highlands, echoing far beyond the barracks walls. If this is the government's solution, what happens when the next wave arrives?